"You are not the architect of record." "Elisa," Damon announced, his voice carrying clearly across the reception hall. The air conditioning in the high-rise felt cold against my skin, but it was his words that caused the real chill. I stood just 10 feet away from him, watching him address the City Planning Commission and the press. A sleek, arrogant smirk plastered across his face. He was holding the signed contract for the Skyline Transit Hub, the largest, most complex project our firm, Atlas Design, had ever landed. It was a contract I had spent 6 years of my life building toward. The credit for this landmark structure goes solely to me, Damon Hayes, he continued, adjusting the tie of his expensive suit. He didn't even look in my direction. My vision, my leadership, and my tireless work ethic made this possible. I saw the city commissioner nod approvingly, and I felt the betrayal not as a sudden blow, but as a slow, inevitable realization of a trap I had foolishly walked into. I am Eliza Thorne, 34 years old, quiet and hyper-competent. I am the structural engineer who conceived of the asymmetrical support system, the one who spent 10 months hand-drawing the passive solar kinetic facade that made this design revolutionary. Damon was the business partner, the face of the firm who specialized in making big, empty promises. We were supposed to be 50-50 partners, an equal split on paper, but he had just publicly erased my professional existence from the most important project of my career. I gave him the credit for the initial concept 6 years ago to help secure seed funding, sacrificing the lead designer role for the first 3 projects just to get the firm started. I told myself it was for the greater good of Atlas Design. He promised that once the firm was established, we would rotate the lead roles, and my name would be front and center for the major contracts. He'd said, "Elisa, you build the impossible, I'll build the brand. We are a team." That promise was the bedrock of my professional trust. While I was working 80-hour weeks in the office, running complex finite element analysis simulations for the hub design, he was jet-setting to networking conferences and entertaining prospective clients with the firm's line of credit. My entire life was focused on the structural integrity of this project. His was focused on the integrity of his personal myth. He may have stolen the recognition, but he hadn't stolen the truth of the design. He was about to find out how little that paper title mattered when the structural competence disappeared. Just 3 months ago, Damon signed the final corporate restructuring documents, quietly removing my name from the Articles of Incorporation's design principal role and listing me instead as senior project manager. I signed the documents because he convinced me it was a necessary liability move. I postponed my professional licensing exam 3 times over 4 years to pull Damon's financial proposals back from the brink of disaster. Using my own personal savings to stabilize the firm's payroll during a slow period, he assured me the restructuring was purely administrative and that my ownership stake and design authority remained untouched. He even joked, "Who needs fancy titles when you're the one holding the pencil?" Eliza, I believed him because I needed the partnership to work. He uses our firm's success built on my blood, sweat, and mathematical genius to fund his absurdly lavish lifestyle. I still drove the 10-year-old compact car I bought in college. He leased a new Italian sports car every 18 months and charged the full payments to the firm's operating expenses as a mobile advertising unit. The insult of being called a project manager for my own creation was a spark. My competence was not a liability to be managed. It was a weapon I had kept sheathed for too long. He unilaterally decided to freeze my access to the main client communications and architectural software licenses, claiming it was for security and streamlined control ahead of the big contract. I was forced to use an older Browdialis, slower terminal with read-only access. When the firm hit a major financial snag during the initial COVID slump, I sold my inherited condo to inject a substantial capital sum into the business, effectively saving Atlas Design from certain bankruptcy. I lived in a cheap, rented loft for 3 years afterward, Damon publicly framed my financial bailout as a loan to the firm, ensuring that he retained control of the firm's equity. While I was only a long-term creditor, he used the concept of my generosity as a tool for his control. He controls the money and the client relationships, leveraging my architectural brilliance as a mere tool to generate his wealth. I generated the 7 figures. He signed the checks and allocated 0 figures to my personal bonus. His attempt to slow me down using technical roadblocks revealed his fear. If he needed to manage my access, it meant he knew I held the actual power. That was a vulnerability I would exploit with precise, mathematical calm. Later that evening, at the celebration dinner for the contract, Damon raised a glass and praised me in front of the dozens of assembled stakeholders. "To Elisa," he slurred, "for being the quiet force behind the numbers. Every great visionary needs a diligent technician to crunch the data. I worked through a severe bout of pneumonia, designing the complex drainage systems for the project's underground parking, because Damon had overpromised the deadline during one of his high-stakes client dinners. He constantly referred to my innovative designs not as architecture, but as technical solutions and data models. He used this calculated mischaracterization to suggest that the art of the deal and the vision belonged to him, while the tedious labor was mine. Damon, who couldn't read a structural load-bearing analysis without flipping to the summary page, was receiving applause and congratulations from the industry's elite for the elegant complexity of the Skyhub design. I, the actual creator, was relegated to the status of a glorified calculator. The term diligent technician was the final straw. It was a calculated, deliberate erasure of my intellectual property. The applause around the table meant nothing. Their eventual silence would mean everything. During a minor disagreement over the construction materials for the facade, Damon overruled my highly detailed, code-compliant specification list in front of the main contractor. He did it purely to assert dominance. I spent 2 full months conducting peer reviews and certification checks for a major competitor's project, pro bono, to help Atlas Design build moral capital and integrity in the local industry after Damon was caught exaggerating his educational credentials. Damon presented his solution for the materials a cheaper, less tested composite by claiming my specifications were overly complex and unnecessarily expensive. A implied I lacked commercial sense. He values superficial cost-cutting and ego over the rigorous standards that defined my work. And yet he profits entirely from the reputation of that work's quality. His incompetence was a performance designed to diminish my expertise. I quietly documented the conversation, noting the time, witnesses, and the exact difference in material specifications. I would not argue with him. I would let the building code argue for me later. Damon actively blocked my hiring choice for a crucial senior structural analyst, instead bringing in his college friend, who had 0 experience in high-rise, mixed-use construction, but was loyal to Damon. I trained Damon myself on how to speak about our complex design concepts in simple, client-facing terms, spending dozens of hours tutoring him so he wouldn't embarrass the firm in meetings. He convinced me that his friend was a trusted insider who could manage the internal team, freeing me up for more important design work. In reality, the friend's role was clearly to be Damon's internal spy and gatekeeper. I provided him with the intelligence, the design expertise to win. He installed a political operative to manage my output. I saw the business as a masterpiece of structural design. He saw it as a network of disposable political assets. I calmly reassigned the new analyst to the most tedious, repetitive administrative tasks possible, effectively isolating him. I would keep the critical design work and the evidence entirely to myself. Standing on the stage, basking in the contract signing applause, Damon pointedly omitted my name from the thank you list, instead listing the caterer and the printing company. I personally guaranteed the lease on our luxurious downtown office space after Damon's terrible credit history nearly sank the deal, staking my own financial future on his performance. He constantly reminded me that without his face and networking ability, my brilliant designs would have stayed in my sketchbook. He leveraged his social confidence against my quiet competence, making me feel that my talent was secondary to his charisma. The contract being celebrated was the zenith of my architectural career, the culmination of 7,000 hours of precise, dedicated work. For him, it was merely the latest, largest installment in his lifestyle fund. I took a final, deep breath. The years of quiet sacrifice were over. He wanted to play games with credit and titles. I would play games with the financial integrity of the company he thought he owned. The time for diplomacy had ended. The time for architectural precision in revenge had begun. The sting of being called a diligent technician by Damon was a familiar echo of a much deeper, older pattern of betrayal. He hadn't just stolen the credit for the Skyline Transit Hub. He had systematically chipped away at my professional soul for 6 years, always justifying his actions as necessary for the firm's growth. I took my glass of untouched champagne and walked to the quiet periphery of the banquet hall. I needed to revisit the history of Atlas design, the true ledger of sacrifice, before I could execute the final, precise strike. In the early days, when we won our first large residential contract, Damon explicitly told the client, "Eliza handles the back-end compliance. I am the conceptual lead," defining my role as subservient from the start. I spent 2 years teaching Damon the fundamental principles of sustainable architecture and creating detailed presentation models so he could sound knowledgeable to investors. Sacrificing my personal time and believing I was investing in our collective future, he used this simplified knowledge to criticize my final designs, arguing they were over-engineered and too academic, turning my teaching against me to undermine my authority. While Damon, whose only architectural contribution was selecting the firm's office color palette, was receiving invitations to university lecture series as a visionary in sustainable urban planning. I, the one who wrote the actual code for the thermal management systems, was not even listed as his co-author on the white papers he presented. I realized his goal wasn't to learn, but to mask his incompetence using my expertise. So I began developing proprietary structural calculations that he couldn't possibly understand or replicate. 3 years ago, Damon convinced me to personally co-sign a high-interest business loan for equipment purchases, equipment that he consistently leased out to his personal friends' construction projects for cash. I liquidated a significant portion of my retirement savings to make several large good-faith payments on that loan when the firm's accounts were short. Believing I was protecting Atlas Design's credit rating, he used my status as the primary guarantor to subtly shift all the liability onto me during internal reviews, focusing my efforts only on high-margin projects to cover the exposure. I bore the risk of personal financial ruin for the firm's debt, yet he used the firm's capital reserves to purchase an expensive antique clock for his home office, justifying it as an executive asset. The moment I saw the clock logged as an asset, I stopped trusting the official records and began tracing a parallel, immutable paper trail. Damon deliberately kept me out of all final contract negotiations with the Skyline Transit Hub client, claiming my intense technical focus would scare off the non-technical executives. Despite this, I wrote the 90-page technical addendum for the contract, the critical document defining structural performance guarantees working non-stop for 72 hours straight. He later confessed to the client's legal team that I was temperamental and difficult to manage, framing my insistence on precise standards as a personality flaw to make the client feel they needed him as a buffer against me. He was hailed as the consummate dealmaker for securing the contract, while I received an anonymous HR review complaining about my lack of collaborative spirit. I knew my 90-page addendum was a legal time bomb for him. It guaranteed specific performance metrics that only my design could deliver, leaving him liable if he strayed. I filed a provisional patent for the key kinetic facade system used in the Skyline Hub, naming myself as the sole inventor. Damon immediately filed a competing claim, listing the firm as the inventor and himself as the primary contributor, arguing that since I developed the final commercialized model while employed, the intellectual property was automatically corporate property. I had initially conceptualized the system during my graduate thesis, long before I met Damon, sacrificing lucrative consulting opportunities to focus on the research that laid the firm's technical foundation. He was trying to take sole legal ownership of a complex structural innovation that required 8 years of specialized training. While I was simply trying to protect its integrity, I quietly hired a high-powered IP attorney, using my personal retainer, to fight the firm's claim, deciding to wait for the moment of maximum humiliation to use that legal leverage. I discovered that for the last 2 years, Damon had been funneling a fixed monthly amount from the firm's project management fund, labeling it miscellaneous external consultant fees, which actually went to pay for his estranged wife's luxury apartment rent. I had deferred a substantial portion of my own salary for 18 months, living on a fraction of what I was owed, all to manage unexpected construction delays on a previous project. Damon blamed the firm's cash flow issues on overly generous subcontractor bids and Eliza's slow technical reviews, deflecting suspicion from his systematic personal siphoning. While I was living frugally, pouring all my resources back into the firm's survival, Damon was using Atlas Design as a personal ATM to maintain his failed marriage's financial obligations. This was no longer just about credit. This was criminal fraud. I knew the miscellaneous consultant fees were traceable. Damon actively refused to allow any industry magazine interviews with me, claiming I didn't photograph well and that my presence would dilute the firm's unified brand message. I had turned down a prestigious teaching position at a major architecture school, a position that would have given me immense personal credibility, because he convinced me it would show a lack of total commitment to Atlas Design. He convinced me that true mastery was proven by the work, not the press, using the idea of quiet professionalism as a shield to hide the fact that he was professionally censoring me. Damon, the public face, had a dedicated media kit and a full-time PR assistant, while I was forbidden from speaking to external reporters. I stopped trying to argue with his PR strategy, instead submitting my technical papers and project data to niche, academic engineering journals under an alias, establishing an external, verifiable record of my true expertise that he could not control. Finally, I overheard Damon on a phone call with a broker, casually discussing leveraging the upcoming Skyline Transit Hub contract payment as collateral for a massive, high-risk personal property investment that would have bankrupted the firm if the client payment was delayed by even 30 days. I had designed Atlas Design's internal quality control and safety protocols, creating a rigorous system that had saved the firm millions in liability claims. He presented his reckless collateral plan not as a risk, but as a brilliant diversification strategy. I had dedicated myself to eliminating risk and ensuring safety through architectural precision. He was deliberately exposing the entire firm, my life's work, and my personal financial guarantees to maximum, unnecessary risk for his own selfish gain. This was the moment of no return. His professional license was now irrelevant. His solvency was the true target. I needed to move beyond suspicion and find the undeniable financial proof that would trigger his total professional and legal collapse. I stood before the city commissioner, Charles Vance, the noise of the celebration dinner still loud behind us, but suddenly muffled and distant. I was holding the folded paper, the bank receipt, the silent, high-impact proof that would shatter Damon's carefully constructed reality. "Commissioner," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. "I need to formally report a critical breach of fiduciary duty concerning the City of Atlanta Transit Hub Trust Fund." His celebratory smile evaporated. He looked down at the receipt I offered him, then back up at my face, sensing the absolute, unwavering truth in my demeanor. I unfolded the simple, physical bank receipt and placed it directly into Commissioner Vance's hand. The document clearly showed a 6-figure wire transfer labeled Miscellaneous External Consultant Fee, originating from the City Trust Fund to the Caribbean Shell Corporation. I gave up my immediate ability to claim Atlas Design as a going concern by handing over this proof, I was initiating an investigation that would immediately halt the firm's cash flow and expose my 6 years of investment to receivership. Damon had specifically instructed the financial team to use a bank where the physical receipts were automatically archived off-site, believing this distance would protect him from immediate discovery. Damon believed that complex financial layering could mask simple theft. My proof was elegantly simple. Vance's eyes widened as he processed the bank details. "This is the City Trust Fund," he whispered, recognizing the account number. I gave him a curt nod. The reversal had begun. As Commissioner Vance digested the gravity of the receipt, I discreetly activated a pre-written message on my phone. This message simultaneously sent the bank receipt image and the IP patent infringement suit details to my lawyer, the Professional Licensing Board, and the lead Transit Hub journalist. I endured Damon's public mockery, the diligent technician comment just hours earlier, knowing that my sustained silence and calm would make this moment of exposure exponentially more devastating. Damon was giving a loud, rambling toast, convinced he was winning the night. He had no idea that the public relations narrative he controlled was already dissolving. The journalist would have the story within 5 minutes. Commissioner Vance, his face white with controlled fury, immediately excused himself and walked directly toward Damon, who was still laughing loudly with a group of potential investors. I watched my own creation, the thriving architectural firm, about to be gutted, knowing that the structural integrity of the design was worth more than the business entity that housed it. Damon tried to greet Vance with an easy smile and a hearty handshake, believing the commissioner was approaching to congratulate him again. Vance didn't shake his hand. I saw Vance point a rigid finger down at Damon's chest and heard the sharp, low words, "Federal investigation." Now. The mask of success had finally fractured. Damon's arrogance collapsed instantly. He sputtered and denied the claim. But the moment Vance confirmed the City Trust Fund violation, the investors Damon was courting abruptly turned their backs and left the banquet hall without a single word. I stood alone near the edge of the room, having severed all professional and financial ties to Damon. He relied entirely on the transactional loyalty of his network, believing his charisma would protect him. He was utterly alone. The firm's name was ruined. The contract was nullified, and the people he needed most had abandoned him. 2 uniformed police officers quietly approached Damon as Commissioner Vance produced the bank receipt one last time for confirmation. I faced the immediate uncertainty of a firm collapse, knowing I would now only work on my own terms, free of his manipulation. Damon had meticulously crafted a public image of himself as an ethical, savvy businessman, an image that was now being dismantled by the simplest, most transactional evidence of his actual character. The theft of the client's money was his undoing. As Damon was being escorted out, frantic and shouting useless denials, my phone buzzed with a message from my IP lawyer. IP claim successful. All design assets reverted to you as sole inventor. Effective immediately. I accepted the loss of the Atlas Design corporate shell, knowing that the intellectual property, the core of the firm's true value, was now legally and irreversibly mine. Damon had stolen the credit for the design, but I had engineered the legal mechanism to reclaim the entire body of work in the very moment he was physically removed from the premises. He had stolen the name. I had claimed the legacy. The technician now owned the entire vision. Commissioner Vance walked over to me, holding the crumpled bank receipt, his fury softening into professional respect. "Elisa," he said, "you are the architect of record. We need you to take control of this project now. We need this building built correctly." I had spent years being underestimated and quietly enduring his condescension, finally earning the professional respect that Damon had tried to deny me. Damon's victory was a public lie that lasted less than 4 hours. My competence was the quiet, verifiable truth that secured the entire $400 million contract and my professional future. I looked at the commissioner, then back at the receipt, the simple, undeniable evidence of Damon's fraud. "I will take control, Commissioner," I replied. "But I will need a new contract, listing my new firm. And I will need a formal apology from the city for any past misrepresentation of my professional role." I was done being the quiet force. The technician had just claimed her destiny. I collected my belongings and walked out of the banquet hall, leaving the chaos of Damon's downfall behind me. I accepted that my 6-year investment in the initial partnership entity was completely destroyed, knowing that the cost of freedom and integrity was worth the financial write-off. The firm was now a vacant structure, the shell he had stolen, and he was facing years of legal battles based on a single, unnecessary financial crime. His ambition led to prison. My quiet competence led to complete ownership. Sometimes, the most devastating professional revenge is simply letting the villain's own greed write the final transaction and allowing a single, undeniable piece of financial evidence to be the final word. The moral takeaway is simple. Competence can be sidelined, but it cannot be stolen. The moment you expose a charlatan to the immutable logic of numbers, their reality collapses. Damon Hayes wanted to be the architect of my career. Instead, I became the architect of his demise. Subscribe for more shocking, real-life inspired stories. Alike, share and subscribe for more dramatic, twist-filled short stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update.